Hi, I'm Avery Collins, and until last Tuesday, I was senior systems architect at Viral Tech, one of those startup darlings that raised $40 million on the promise of revolutionizing social engagement. You know the type. Open-plan office with exposed brick walls, kombucha on tap next to the inevitable ping-pong table that nobody actually uses, and motivational posters that somehow make you feel less motivated. The kind of place where work-life balance means your life becomes work, but with better snacks. The product launch was supposed to be our moonshot moment. 3 years of development, countless all-nighters, and enough Red Bull to power a small city. I'd built the core infrastructure from the ground up, designing systems that could handle millions of users without breaking a sweat. Think of it like constructing a skyscraper's foundation, unglamorous, invisible, but absolutely critical. Every database query, every caching layer, every fail-safe protocol had been meticulously planned and tested. My team called me the architect not just because of my title, but because I could visualize the entire system architecture in my head like a three-dimensional blueprint. I knew which API endpoints would bottleneck under load, which database tables needed optimization, and exactly how many concurrent users would make our server start sweating. Then Jackson Mitchell, our boyish CTO with his perpetual smirk and collection of vintage band t-shirts, called me into his glass-walled office. The kind of office that screams I'm transparent while somehow making everything feel more opaque. His desk was cluttered with the usual startup executive accessories, a signed baseball, 3 different laptops, and a succulent that was somehow thriving despite the complete absence of natural light. Avery, we're restructuring the team for launch week, he announced, barely looking up from his MacBook Pro covered in stickers from conferences he'd probably never attended. We need more front-end firepower. You know, the flashy stuff that gets investors excited. I felt my stomach drop, but kept my expression neutral, a skill I'd perfected during 3 years of startup politics. And my role? You'll be transitioning to junior developer. Temporary, of course. Just until we get through launch. His laugh had that particular Silicon Valley quality, equal parts dismissive and artificially cheerful, like a laugh track from a sitcom about sociopaths. We need flash, not depth right now. The irony wasn't lost on me. Flash without depth is basically a firework, spectacular for 30 seconds, then nothing but smoke and disappointed spectators staring at an empty sky. I didn't protest. Not because I agreed, but because I'd learned that arguing with Jackson was like trying to debug code by staring at it harder, ultimately futile and guaranteed to give you a headache. Plus, I'd witnessed what happened to people who challenged him. Last month, Oliver from DevOps had questioned Jackson's decision to migrate everything to a new cloud provider during peak traffic season. Oliver was reorganized into a part-time consulting role within a week, which is corporate speak for fired but we don't want to pay unemployment. Instead, I watched from my newly assigned desk in the corner. Yes, they literally moved me to the corner like I was in corporate timeout, complete with a view of the bathroom door and the coffee machine that had been broken since 2019. The symbolism was so heavy-handed it felt like performance art. As the Flash team took over, I got a front-row seat to the most spectacular display of workplace toxicity I'd ever witnessed. There was Madison, fresh out of coding boot camp, who thought CSS animations could solve any performance issue. She had that dangerous combination of enthusiasm and ignorance that makes junior developers particularly destructive. During her first week on the team, she'd suggested we replace our entire caching system with local storage because it's faster, a suggestion that would have been adorable if it wasn't being seriously considered by management. Then there was Tyler, the self-proclaimed UX ninja, whose main qualification seemed to be an extensive collection of designer sneakers and the ability to use Figma without crashing it. Tyler had strong opinions about everything and expertise in nothing. He once spent 4 hours in a meeting explaining why our login button should be more intuitive, which apparently meant changing it from blue to a slightly different shade of blue. And Brian, oh, Brian. He'd joined just 2 weeks prior but somehow became lead developer based on his ability to use buzzwords like synergistic and paradigm shifting in every sentence. Brian had mastered the art of sounding intelligent while saying absolutely nothing. His code comments read like motivational posters. This function leverages innovative methodologies to optimize user engagement through strategic data manipulation. Translation, it returned user IDs. They treated my carefully architected codebase like a garage sale, rummaging through it, discarding the boring parts, error handling, data validation, memory management, and bolting on feature after feature without understanding how anything connected. Watching them work was like watching someone dismantle a Swiss watch with a sledgehammer while insisting they were improving the design. Why do we need all these database connection pools? Madison asked during one particularly painful code review, her voice carrying that special tone of someone who'd discovered something obviously stupid that everyone else had somehow missed. Can't we just connect directly each time? It's more straightforward. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. Explaining why that would crash the app under load felt like trying to describe color to someone who'd never seen light. But this was the new paradigm, experience was old thinking, complexity was over-engineering, and anyone who'd been at the company longer than 6 months was probably holding back innovation. My former teammates, people I'd collaborated with for years, shared late-night debugging sessions with, celebrated successful deployments with, suddenly developed selective blindness when I approached. Conversations would pause awkwardly when I entered a room, then resume after I passed, like I was carrying some contagious form of career failure. Amy from QA, who used to grab coffee with me every morning and complain about Jackson's impossible deadlines, now studied her phone intensely whenever I entered the break room. When I'd try to catch her eye, she'd suddenly remember urgent business elsewhere, leaving behind half-finished conversations and the uncomfortable silence of abandoned loyalty. Even worse was Marcus from Frontend, who'd literally learned React from me during his first month at the company. Now he acted like we'd never met, giving me curt nods instead of the collaborative discussions we used to have. I'd overhear him explaining basic concepts to newcomers, concepts I'd taught him, without ever acknowledging where he'd learned them. The isolation was methodical and complete. Slack channels I'd been active in for years suddenly went quiet when I posted. Meeting invitations stopped arriving. My input was no longer requested for architectural decisions, even though I'd designed most of the systems they were now modifying. The worst part wasn't the isolation, it was watching Jackson parade around like a proud parent, showing off the new streamlined architecture to anyone who'd listen. He'd gesture at screens displaying flashy animations and seamless transitions, completely oblivious to the structural chaos lurking beneath. See how clean this is, he'd say to visiting investors, pointing at code that would make a computer science professor weep. Sometimes you need fresh perspectives to cut through the complexity. We've eliminated all the unnecessary overhead. Fresh perspectives. As if 3 years of system design experience was just accumulated baggage. As if the overhead wasn't the difference between a system that worked and one that looked pretty while falling apart. I started documenting everything. Every ignored warning, every dismissed concern, every time someone called my careful engineering overcomplication. Not out of malice, but out of professional obligation. When systems fail, and they always fail when built without proper foundations, someone needs to understand why. During team stand-up meetings, I'd watch the comedy unfold in real time. Madison would proudly announce she'd optimized a database query by removing the indexing. Tyler would present wireframes for features that were technically impossible with our current architecture. Brian would pontificate about leveraging cloud-native solutions for maximum scalability while implementing code that could barely handle 10 concurrent users. Jackson would nod approvingly at everything, occasionally interjecting with gems like "that's the kind of innovative thinking we need," or "much cleaner than the old approach." He'd grown increasingly confident as launch approached, feeding off the team's enthusiasm and mistaking activity for progress. Launch day arrived with all the fanfare viral tech could muster. The office had been transformed into a war room crossed with a celebration venue. Champagne at 10 a.m., because nothing says professional software deployment like day drinking. A livestream countdown projected on the wall, complete with graphics that probably cost more than my quarterly bonus. Jackson doing what he did best, taking credit for work he barely understood while wearing his lucky disruption or death t-shirt. The entire company gathered around multiple screens showing real-time metrics, user registrations, app downloads, social media mentions. Someone had even hired a photographer to capture our historic moment. The energy was infectious, the kind of collective excitement that makes you temporarily forget about all the warning bells that have been ringing in your head for weeks. I sat at my corner desk, officially assigned to monitoring dashboards, essentially babysitting graphs that tracked server performance. It felt like being relegated to weather reporting after designing the hurricane warning system. My monitors displayed the real nervous system of our application: CPU usage, memory consumption, database connections, response times, error rates. While everyone else watched vanity metrics, I watched the vital signs. At 12:47 p.m., exactly 13 minutes after launch, my dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree in a lightning storm. Error rates spiking from our baseline 0.01% to 15% in the span of 2 minutes. Response times climbing from an average of 200 milliseconds to over 8 seconds. Database connections multiplying like rabbits in spring, quickly approaching our maximum pool size. The patterns were exactly what I'd predicted in my ignored reports. Memory leaks in the user session management. Database queries running without proper optimization. Connection pools exhausting themselves because someone had removed the cleanup procedures. It was like watching a car accident in slow motion, except I was the only one who could see the oncoming traffic. By 1:15, user complaints flooded social media. The app wasn't just slow, it was actively hostile, crashing mid-conversation, deleting posts that users had spent time crafting, and somehow managing to send push notifications for events that didn't exist. Our carefully curated launch hashtag viral tech launch was being used ironically by users documenting the spectacular failure. App crashes every time I try to upload a photo hashtag viral tech launch hashtag epic fail. Lost 30 minutes of work because the app deleted my post while I was editing it hashtag viral tech launch hashtag never again. Getting notifications for events in 1987. Your time travel feature is broken hashtag viral tech launch. I sat there, watching the digital disaster unfold in real time, feeling like a meteorologist watching a tornado they'd predicted but couldn't prevent. The irony was exquisite. They'd removed the person who understood the system's breaking points, then acted surprised when it broke exactly where I'd said it would. Around me, the celebration slowly morphed into confusion, then concern, then barely controlled panic. The photographer stopped taking pictures. Someone turned off the live stream. Jackson's confident smile began to crack around the edges as his phone buzzed with increasingly frantic messages from investors and board members. At 3:42 p.m., after hours of increasingly desperate patch attempts, Jackson burst through the office doors like a man possessed. His lucky t-shirt was now damp with panic sweat, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his eyes wide with the kind of terror usually reserved for horror movie protagonists who've just realized the call is coming from inside the house. "Why is the app crashing non-stop?" he screamed, his voice cracking slightly on non-stop, the question echoing through the suddenly silent office. The office fell silent except for the gentle hum of servers that were probably plotting their own rebellion and the distant sound of Tyler's sneakers squeaking against the floor as he shifted nervously. What followed was the most beautiful display of corporate chaos I'd ever witnessed, a masterclass in how quickly confidence can transform into pandemonium when reality comes knocking. Jackson ping-ponged between developers like a pinball with anxiety disorder, demanding explanations that none of them could provide. His usual swagger had been replaced by the frantic energy of someone trying to hold back a dam with their bare hands. Every few minutes, his phone would buzz with what I could only assume were increasingly hostile messages from investors, board members, and probably his mother. Madison, our CSS animation enthusiast, suggested turning off non-essential features, which, in her interpretation, included user authentication, data encryption, and the ability to actually save user content. "We can add those back later once we figure out the performance issues," she said with the confidence of someone who'd never seen a system collapse under real-world load. Tyler, meanwhile, proposed a complete visual redesign, because apparently crashing apps just needed better fonts and more intuitive color schemes. "Maybe if we make the loading screens more engaging, users won't mind waiting," he offered, pulling up a Figma mockup he'd apparently been working on during the crisis. The mockup featured a dancing mascot and the phrase, "Great things are coming," in Comic Sans. Brian's contribution was perhaps the most spectacular. He spent 20 minutes explaining how this was actually a positive user engagement opportunity and suggested we rebrand the crashes as mindfulness breaks to help users disconnect from digital overwhelm. His ability to spin disaster into opportunity was almost admirable, if it weren't so completely divorced from reality. I received exactly 47 Slack messages in 2 hours, all variations of "Can you help?" and "Do you remember how the database stuff works?" from people who'd been treating me like furniture for weeks. The desperation was palpable, like watching people suddenly remember you exist when they need a kidney. Amy from QA, who'd been avoiding eye contact for weeks, sent me a message that simply read, "Avery, I'm sorry. Can we talk?" The sorry felt both too little and strangely validating. Marcus from Frontend sent a longer message, "Hey, I know things have been weird lately, but I'm completely lost in the code you wrote. Could you walk me through the session management system? Also, do you know why users are getting logged out every 30 seconds? The best message came from Brian, "Hey Avery, could you take a quick look at the connection pooling? There might be a tiny issue with the optimization we implemented. A tiny issue. Like calling the Titanic's encounter with the iceberg a minor navigation hiccup. I responded to each message with professional courtesy and strategic helpfulness. I answered direct technical questions but didn't volunteer solutions. I provided information but not interpretation. Think of it as malicious compliance's more sophisticated cousin, helpful unhelpfulness. The connection pool exhaustion you're seeing is likely related to the cleanup procedures that were removed from the session management module, I replied to Brian. Check the commit history from last Tuesday around 3 p.m. I didn't mention that I'd specifically flagged this as a critical issue in my handover notes, or that the fix would require understanding architectural decisions he'd dismissed as over-engineering. By day 2, the situation had evolved from crisis to catastrophe. User reviews had plummeted to 1.2 stars, with comments that read like poetry written by very angry poets. This app is where user experience goes to die. I've had root canals that were more pleasant than using this software. Deleted the app. Deleted my account. Considering deleting my phone out of precaution. Tech blogs were having a field day, with headlines that felt like personal vindication wrapped in professional disaster. Viral tech app launch goes viral for all the wrong reasons. How to lose $40 million in funding in 48 hours. The crash heard round Silicon Valley, a postmortem of ambition. From unicorn to dead horse, the viral tech meltdown. Jackson's confident swagger had completely evaporated, replaced by the haunted look of someone who'd just realized their parachute was actually a backpack full of regrets and expired kombucha. He'd stopped wearing his vintage band t-shirts, opting instead for increasingly formal button-downs, as if professional attire could somehow contain the professional disaster. The office atmosphere became surreal. People spoke in hushed tones, as if speaking normally might further anger the app gods. The champagne bottles from launch day sat unopened in the break room like monuments to hubris. Someone had taped a piece of paper over the days without a critical bug counter that had been reset to 0 so many times the dry erase marker had given up. Emergency meetings were called hourly, each one more desperate than the last. I wasn't invited to most of them, but I could hear the raised voices through Jackson's glass office walls. Phrases like investor confidence, damage control, and who authorized this change floated through the air with increasing frequency and volume. Meanwhile, I continued my corner desk vigil, watching the system metrics like a physician monitoring a patient in critical condition. Every crash, every timeout, every database deadlock was logged and cataloged. Not out of malice, but out of professional obligation. When the postmortem came, and it would come, someone would need to explain what had happened and why. The fix attempts became increasingly desperate and increasingly counterproductive. Someone suggested restarting all the servers simultaneously, during peak usage hours. Another brilliant mind proposed rolling back to a version from 3 months ago, apparently forgetting that 3 months of database schema changes would make that impossible without data loss. Tyler spent an entire day redesigning the error messages to be more user-friendly, because apparently when your app is crashing every 5 minutes, the real problem is that users don't understand why. His new error messages read like inspirational quotes, "Oops. Something beautiful is happening behind the scenes, and your patience is creating magic." By Thursday, the crash reports had started forming patterns that would have been hilarious if they weren't so professionally devastating. Users were reporting that the app would crash when they tried to upload photos, send messages, view their profiles, change their settings, log out, or sometimes just open the app and breathe near their phone. The customer support team, led by the perpetually optimistic Jamie, had given up trying to provide technical solutions and started offering users yoga breathing techniques to center themselves during the digital transition. The support ticket system had crashed under the volume of complaints, which was almost poetic in its recursive failure. On Friday morning, I found an email in my inbox from Helen Zhao, our VP of Engineering, one of the few executives who actually understood code and hadn't been swept up in Jackson's flash over substance revolution. The subject line read simply, "Coffee," but the timestamp was 5:47 a.m., which in startup time translates to "We need to talk immediately about something that couldn't wait until business hours." We met at the third-floor cafe, away from the chaos of the main floor where Jackson was probably still trying to explain to increasingly skeptical investors why our revolutionary app had become a case study in how not to launch software. Helen looked tired but amused, like someone who'd just solved a particularly satisfying puzzle while simultaneously watching their predictions come true in the most spectacular way possible. Jackson's been let go, she said without preamble, setting down her coffee with the kind of deliberate calm that comes after making very difficult decisions. The board met yesterday at 6 a.m. Emergency session. Apparently, launching a broken product while demoting your most experienced architect struck them as poor judgment. She paused, watching my reaction with the careful attention of someone who'd navigated enough corporate politics to know that vindication can be complicated. There's also going to be an investigation into the decision-making process that led to this. The board wants to understand how we got here. I sipped my coffee, letting the information settle. There was satisfaction, yes, but it was quiet and professional, the kind you feel when a long-term prediction finally proves correct, tempered by the knowledge that the cost of being right was significant for everyone involved. What about the rest of the team? I asked, because despite everything, I didn't want to see careers destroyed by poor leadership decisions they hadn't fully understood. Madison's being transferred to our training program, she has potential, just needs proper mentorship. Tyler's moving to our design team where his aesthetic instincts might be better utilized. Brian. Helen paused with the slight smile of someone delivering justice. Brian's contract won't be renewed. Turns out buzzwords aren't actually a programming language. I'm reinstating you as senior systems architect, effective immediately, Helen continued, her voice taking on the formal tone of someone making official offers. With a 20% salary increase, a formal apology for this entire mess, and a guarantee that architectural decisions will go through proper review processes going forward. Think you can fix what they broke? I smiled, feeling something I hadn't experienced in weeks, professional respect and the particular satisfaction that comes from being asked to solve problems you'd predicted and could have prevented. Give me 2 weeks and a competent team. We'll have it running better than before. Done. You'll have access to any resources you need, including external consultants if necessary. The board has authorized whatever it takes to restore user confidence. She leaned back in her chair, looking like someone who'd just removed a particularly stubborn splinter. They've also asked me to lead a review of our promotion and project management processes. Apparently, dismissing senior engineers before major launches might be counterproductive. The understatement was so profound it deserved its own case study. Over the following week, I assembled a small team of competent engineers, some from within the company, some contractors Helen had approved. We worked systematically, methodically, fixing not just the immediate crises but implementing the proper architecture that should have been there from the beginning. 6 months later, the app has a 4.7-star rating and handles 3 times the original projected load without breaking a sweat. The user reviews now read like testimonials to reliability, finally, an app that actually works, and haven't had a single crash in months. We've implemented proper monitoring, sensible caching, and all those unnecessary features like error handling and data validation that had been stripped away in the name of simplification. I still work at Viral Tech, but now I have Helen's direct support and a team that understands the difference between Flash and Foundation. My new office has actual windows and a door that closes, small perks that feel symbolic of being valued rather than tolerated. The culture has shifted too. We have proper code reviews now, architectural planning sessions, and a prevention over reaction philosophy that would have seemed revolutionary 6 months ago. Madison, properly mentored, has become quite good at front-end development and regularly asks thoughtful questions about performance implications. Tyler's designs are actually implementable now, and he's learned to ask, is this technically feasible, before presenting wireframes. Jackson? Last I heard through the Silicon Valley Gossip Network, he's working at a startup that develops revolutionary meditation apps focused on mindful technology integration. I hope he's found some inner peace, because his outer career certainly needed it. The last news I saw about his new venture was a blog post titled, Why We're Building Meditation Differently, which somehow managed to use the phrase paradigm shifting 17 times in 800 words. Amy from QA and I grabbed coffee again, and she's told me several times how much she regretted the way she handled the situation. Marcus has become one of my strongest collaborators and frequently credits me in team meetings when explaining concepts he's learned. The restoration of professional relationships has been almost as satisfying as the technical recovery. The corner desk? I kept it, despite having earned a much better office. The view of everyone else's panic-induced stress responses turned out to be quite educational, and now it serves as a daily reminder of the importance of building systems and teams on solid foundations rather than flashy promises. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic, it's simply being indispensably good at what you do. And occasionally, it's watching the people who underestimated you discover exactly why you were irreplaceable in the first place. But more than revenge, what I learned is that real professional satisfaction comes from building things that work, solving problems that matter, and being part of teams that value substance over style. The app we saved isn't just functional, it's elegant in the way that properly engineered systems can be. Every feature works as intended, every interaction is smooth, and users trust it enough to build their digital lives around it. That's the kind of flash that actually matters, the quiet brilliance of systems that work so well, you never have to think about them. In the end, depth and flash aren't mutually exclusive. You just need to build the depth first, then let the flash emerge naturally from solid foundations. It's a lesson I hope Jackson learns at his mindful meditation startup, though given his track record, I'm not placing any bets.